Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night and this morning of the local time. The most important updates are coming from Shebekina, from Belgorod region, and as you may heard that the Ukrainians during the previous night, after a few days of artillery preparation, artillery strikes in this area, launched an offensive operation and were trying to cross the border between Russia and Ukraine in the vicinity of Shebekina, as we discussed a few videos ago. So the Ukrainians launched a few motorized and mechanized squads under support of reconnaissance group. Some sources were saying that they managed to reach the border, maybe to get deep inside the territory of Russian Federation for a few hundreds of meters, but Russians managed to bring and redeploy reinforcements in this area, and as a result of fierce fightings on the borders, the Ukrainians were defeated and were forced to step back. The Russians published a few videos of the results of those clashes on the border. That you saw a small explosion on the right side of this video, this one, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. Furthermore, the Russian sources are saying that the Ukrainians continue accumulation of their force along the border with Belgorod, and there are almost every single day they bring more and more forces in this area. To tell the truth, the situation is very difficult for the Russians, and mainly is because of this bridgehead between Kharkov, Shebekina, and let's say Kupiansk front line. This area I'll show you on the map. So currently I'm talking about this bridgehead. This is a very painful bridgehead for the Russians because as you can see, according to this map, you see that this bridgehead is located, let's say, on the corner, and the Ukrainians, this situation reminds me the same situation as we discussed in the previous video in Krasnogorovka, in the vicinity of Avdiivka. Currently, the Ukrainians using this bridgehead are able to attack and storm and attack and bomb and shell the Russian positions in Shebekina. Furthermore, using the same bridgehead, the Ukrainians can attack and support the Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of Masyutovka on the Kupiansk front line. And of course, the Ukrainians using the same bridgehead are able to attack this position, trying to cut and supply the Russian supply roads, because the Russians use the same reserves for these three directions, and mainly those reserves the Russians are trying to send along these railroad ways and along the roads along the border, and using those arrows the Ukrainians can suppress and to attack the Russian forces. Furthermore, after the failed attempt to attack Shebekina, the Ukrainians continue shelling and bombing the Russian settlements on this side, and as you can see, and nobody knows, and we don't have any information if the Ukrainians take a decision to launch attack in direction of this line, whether the Russians are able to stop the Ukrainians. I'll remind you that this situation could happen, and the reason why the situation could happen is that the Ukrainians during the previous week redeployed at least two brigades in this area. The first one is 55th Artillery Brigade, and their position is currently in this area, and as you can see, it's I believe that this artillery has a lot of types of weapon, or western weapon, modern weapon with long range distance attack, and probably this is this brigade. Furthermore, there were 47th Artillery Brigade in this area, so currently there is a very powerful artillery fist in this area, and currently the Russians have a lot of problems with that. And don't forget that recently the Ukrainians have redeployed newly created 88th Mechanized Brigade in this area, so probably the parts of those brigade also make some kind of support operations for the main forces, and currently that operation, based on the information we have, was prepared and organized, and also the main forces who took part in that operation was the Russian Volunteer Corps, those ones who recently have crossed the border in the vicinity of Kozinka. You remember that cases. So what the Ukrainians are trying to do, first of all, if they can, they will try to create a buffer zone, and as we discussed, to get in the vicinity of Shebekina and to try to take this area, because I'll remind you one more time that these settlements are located on the Ukrainians, let's say on the Ukrainian side of Seversky Donets River, and this is the best position for the Ukrainians if they can capture them to create a buffer, because it will be very difficult for the Russians to return this position. But the main thing, I believe so, is not that the Ukrainians are trying to capture that area. The thing is that the Ukrainians are trying to force, currently the Russians' defense line goes like this. So as you can see, there is, in comparison with the Ukrainians, this is much more bigger defense line. the wrong color, sorry. And that means that if the Russians want to like solve the situation, they need to start offensive operation on the Kupiansk area before, let's say, offensive operation in Avdiivka or something like this. And the thing is that probably the Russians are not ready to start this offensive operation, not because they don't have manpower or something like this. They have limited reserves, and probably the Russians don't want to use these reserves for that operation. And the Ukrainians from their side want to force the Russians to enter exactly this area, because this is like this area doesn't have any value, and the only value of that area is like a buffer zone and to reduce the artillery and shelling attack against Belgorod and Russian territory. So this is the only value. And of course, when talking about Avdiivka, Ugledar, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, I believe that the Russians wanted to use those forces in those directions, but not here. But who knows, because we see that there were a lot of casualties among civilians, and the Russians reported around 8 civilians were wounded. There are a lot of explosions, and some sources are saying that currently Belgorod is under the most fierce artillery attacks in this special military operation, and some sources are saying that currently the Ukrainians attacks Belgorod even more intensified than in comparison with Donetsk, and we know how Donetsk is under very heavy fire. It was since the beginning of the special military operation. So imagine yourself the fierce artillery strikes in this area, what the level of those artillery strikes. So probably the Russians will be forced to make some decisions and to attack the Ukrainians in this area with one purpose: to maintain the bridgehead and to capture everything that located on the right side of this red line. So probably this is exactly what the Ukrainians are trying to force the Russians to do. And that's it for this short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.